Welcome to the PMP certification training, and this here is our session on project stakeholder management. Today we'll be covering chapter 13 on project stakeholder management from the PMBok 5th edition. Chapter 13 covers 4 processes. These processes in the main were taken from chapter 10. Prior to the 5th edition, there was no stakeholder management knowledge area, only project communication management. And in the 5th edition, PMI sought to have stakeholder management dealt with as an explicit topic, as well as an explicit knowledge area. So here we have 4 processes, and I'll provide a summary of each process in the next slide. So the first process is identify stakeholders. So we identify who are these people and groups and organizations that influence and can cause and are impacted by the project. We identify who these entities are. Then we have plans. So after we identify them, we have to develop some strategy in order to engage them. Interestingly, you would see here we have plan stakeholder management, and primarily we are dealing here with stakeholder engagement. Thus the next process, manage stakeholder engagement, occurs. PMI and some authors also indicate that you can manage people if you have direct control or they are under your authority. If they are not, then what you can do is engage as opposed to manage per se. So here we have manage stakeholder engagement. And in this case, manage means execute the plan. So identify stakeholders as you identify who are the people and groups and organizations who can influence the project or be impacted by it. Then we put a strategy in place to ensure with increased successful engagement, successful satisfaction, and then we execute the plan. So plan stakeholder engagement is actually executing the plan that you would have developed on the plan stakeholder management process. And then finally, control. There would be changes. New stakeholders will come on board, others will leave. New stakeholders will have different needs, requirements, level of influence may change. And so there's need to ensure that there's a monitoring of it and making the necessary adjustment to your strategies and to your plans. So who are our stakeholders? Very comprehensive definition: individuals, groups, or organizations. 3 entities who may affect, that is, bring change to the project, be affected by, that is, something happened to them, or they perceive themselves being affected. And they can be affected by a decision, they can be affected by an activity of the project, or an eventual outcome. So if you're doing construction, for example, an activity might be the movement of aggregate. That can cause dust in the environment near the houses and where residents, where people reside. And people can be affected by that activity. Okay, or the eventual outcome. It might be a park that is being developed. So the outcome being a play park, and there's increased recreation, there's increased healthy children in the community, etc. So those are just some examples. And then we see actual examples of stakeholders are the PM, customer, sponsor, and the list can go on. Right? So these are what we refer to as project stakeholders. This diagram shows stakeholders can be internal to the performing organization, such as sponsor, the project team, or stakeholders can be external to the performing organization, like contractors, suppliers, and also competitors. So stakeholders can be within the performing organization and outside of the performing organization. Identify stakeholders is the first process. Now observe, this process occurs in the initiating process group together with develop project charter. So the first 2 processes overall, out of all 47 processes as stated in the 5th edition, are develop the charter, chapter 4, identify stakeholders, chapter 13. Now, these two processes need to be fulfilled before moving on to planning. Because if you don't know who your stakeholders are, if they are poorly identified or incomplete at that, what you can have is a high risk to your project. Because let's say you did not include a safety officer in your identification of stakeholders, or you didn't include some other key individual, and then somewhere during your project planning or execution, things come up and this stakeholder or these stakeholders weren't involved, and it can cause the project to have delays. The project can suffer unduly. So even before going into planning, your stakeholders must be identified. So techniques includes the stakeholder analysis, expert judgment. People who would have done this project before or something similar can advise and say, listen, you need to advise the health and safety officer. You need to engage persons from audit, or even the user group. Sometimes what we call the quote-unquote lower level staff may not be engaged or identified up front, and that in itself can add to some degree of risk. All right, so identify stakeholders. Some of the things that should be done throughout the project with regard to stakeholders include identify as much as possible as you can all of them. There may be several. You want to determine their requirements. Now, this is all part of identification. Identify stakeholders, right, and in developing of your stakeholder register, which is your main output from this process. So you determine what are their requirements. You determine the expectations. Now, all of this is a sort of a preliminary planning. You don't get into much. Whatever detail is given, you actually accept. But this may overlap somewhat with collect requirements, because there is under the scope management area, collect requirements as a specific process. So here you may ask stakeholders questions that you may again repeat, but with further details. What you want to have here is a degree of appreciation of what their requirements are, what do they expect from the project, what is their interest, their level of influence, who can shut down the project, who know who. You want to have an idea how you would, a plan, how you want to communicate with them. Is it via email? Is it via WhatsApp? Is it a intranet update? You want to communicate with them throughout the project. You want to make sure keep them in the loop via whatever means would have been agreed upon. And finally, you want to manage the expectation and influence by constantly polling them, monitoring, engaging, making adjustments to your plans accordingly. Right? So these are very important and helps to improve project success. So one of the techniques that is used under identify stakeholder is your stakeholder analysis. And it's a technique of gathering and analyzing both quantitative and qualitative information pertaining to your stakeholders in terms of who are your potential. You want to analyze the impact or support of them. You want to assess how these stakeholders are likely to react or respond to changes within your project. And there are 4 grids under stakeholder analysis techniques that you can use. One which is the most popular being the power interest grid. So of the aid in the stakeholder analysis, let's briefly touch on these 4 grids and then take a little more in depth into the power interest grid, followed by an example. So the 4 techniques, we have power interest, power influence, impact, salience, model, and you can look at the PMBok for details of all of these, but we want to do a little deep dive into the power interest grid. So with the power interest grid, you will see the intention is to ascertain the level of authority and the level of concern. So you have, let's use the same example of constructing a play park. You may have persons who are sponsoring the financing the project, and persons may have probably high interest, so you may want to manage them closely. They are the upper right quadrant, high power, i.e. high level of authority and high level of concern. The person to the group to the lower right, that is low power and high level of concern. If you think, who might that be? Well, normally that group there would represent the user group, persons who will be using what is being produced. So if it's the play park, it will be persons of the community. They would have high interest because they're going to use it. Their level of authority will not be that high as those who are sponsoring and persons who may own the property in which that park is going to be built. So you want to keep them informed. That might be as part of your strategy. There are those with high power and low level of interest. Right? It could be the chairman of the regional corporation. He may not have much of an interest with that particular play park. It may not be in that person's political interest, but the person has authority because they are the chair of the regional corporation and they can pose some political influence that could cause some challenges negatively at that. So here it is that you have, this is to aid in the development of a strategy in when addressing various stakeholders. You will not address each stakeholder in the same way for the sake of effectiveness. So you will address each stakeholder or develop a strategy or what you will do and how you will engage them depending on this power interest grid and which quadrant they may fall into. This is an example of a power interest grid stemming from a strategic planning exercise at the Defense Force, one of their formations. So what we have here is the upper right grid. Commander-in-Chief, His Excellency, the President of the Republic, being a high power, high interest. Chief of Defense Staff, Minister of National Security, and the National Security Council. So when we had listed who these stakeholders are, we indicated that this we believe could be where those stakeholders may be from a strategic planning standpoint. ODPM and Tobago Emergency Management Agency, other Defense Force formations such as Air Guard, Coast Guard, and the Delaware National Guard, who has a twin or relationship with the Trinidad and Tobago Defense Force. They are high interest but low power. Right? So those are some primary stakeholders. Then this here was a strat plan for the Defense Force Reserves, right? So the upper left quadrant, high power, low interest. Employers. So employers here, a lot of reservists are part-timers. As part-timers, you may have, they work at TSTT, they work at WASA, they may be teachers, they may be self-employed, different skill set. And so we have employers of reservists. And at the lowest level, civil society and private sector. So this gave us a guide. Now, there are times in which you may want to shift. You may want to shift how this actually occur. And we will come to another tool that is very helpful in probably shifting where the level of influence and also level of interest, that you could actually, how you can influence that. The output for identify stakeholder is the stakeholder register. With the stakeholder register, you have the names of who the stakeholders are, their contact information, email address, role on the project, sponsor, project manager, manager of the user group, the department that they belong to. They may be from a different organization, the level of impact that stakeholder may have, interests, what are their main expectations that are not listed as requirements, the overall attitude about the project. It can be positive, negative. They wish the project shut down. This project is critical to them because it accomplishes XYZ, and the main requirement. So the stakeholder register, you will seek to fill this list, and this same list can be used to develop a stakeholder management plan or strategy. So what is the first process in the project stakeholder management? If you say identify stakeholders, you are right. So let's go on to the second process. The second process is plan stakeholder management. So having identified who the stakeholders are, we identify appropriate strategies. The operative word here is strategy. What you want to see that depending on the level of influence, depending on that level of concern that the participants that they have, we now will develop a strategy in order to treat with. So the primary output here is the stakeholder management plan. So we want to look at another technique, more so as a tool I should say, that is used to identify current level of engagement of stakeholders and to influence how you would like their plan engagement levels to be. So let's say we have our stakeholders 1, 2, and 3 as shown, and we do an assessment to see what is their current state. Well, stakeholder number 1 currently is totally unaware of the project and of the impact. But we desire for stakeholder number 1 to be supportive. Stakeholder number 2 is neutral, neither here nor there, but we desire for that stakeholder to be supportive. Stakeholder number 3 is already supportive as a current state, and we would like it to stay that way. Now what this does is that wherever the current state is not in the same cell as the desired state, there's a gap. So there's a gap in terms of, from a project perspective, that the stakeholders are not where the project manager would desire to have them be. Once there's a gap, it means a strategy has to be developed in order to close that gap. So let's look at an example in the next slide. With this example, we in developing a strategic plan, and then again, this is highly, you can use perception, you can do an actual survey to validate your data. So we thought that the commander-in-chief was neutral with respect to the reserves. Some have said he is supportive, and he may be, or the data here could be wrong from where the reserves may have seen it. But let's take something that's very stark, like civil society. Civil society and the private sector is like they may be unaware of the reserves, and that has been demonstrated by when the Defense Force reserves are on parade. You would see them in a military outfit, but a red berry. The red berry, that a lot of people actually think they belong to the fire services. That alone indicates the level of ignorance. So civil society, private sector, probably even unaware, is there really such a group? Now, the reserve desired intent is for civil society and private sector to be supportive of them. But therefore, it means work has to be done just to increase the level of visibility of the unit. In other instances, the C and D was found to be on the same cell, and with probably two exceptions, 2 or 3, that was not a main problem. The main highlight challenge was really with civil society and the private sector. So I hope this example helped showcase the how important, and more so I would say how informative is the use of such a tool. So the output of the stakeholder management is a stakeholder management plan, and the plan has the engagement levels of the key stakeholders, that is a strategy or how you would engage these stakeholders, the scope and impact of change to stakeholders that you're looking to make, what are the communication requirements for these stakeholders, are we plan to be in contact with them weekly, monthly, quarterly, as well as how the form of distributing such information. Is it via a portal? Is it via that they have to go and pull? Would we push it out via some sort of email, a bulk email send, like a listserv? The time frame and frequency for sending such information out, and also importantly the methods for updating and refining. So the stakeholder management plan will identify these areas. The idea is to satisfy stakeholders as much as is humanly possible, or if not to satisfy them, to manage the engagement. So if you have a stakeholder who is not a happy camper, your job may not be to make the person a happy camper, but not to make them a destructive, unhappy camper. So you can still be able to manage and temper and the negativism that may be surrounding that particular stakeholder. So having complete your plan, we manage here in this context means that you are using the plan that was developed and you are executing that plan. So to execute the plan means if the plan says that we are going to meet with the stakeholder twice a week, we start meeting twice a week. If the plan says we have to take this stakeholder out for lunch and have a business lunch meeting, that's what we're going to do. So the plan here means you are executing what was planned. When we say manage stakeholder engagement, right? So that's why your primary input is the stakeholder management plan. Tools and techniques, a lot of interpersonal skills required in order for doing so, some management skills, etc. So in the managed stakeholder, we engage the stakeholders, you manage their expectation, we address concerns raised and may create an issues log in order to track those concerns raised and whatever is other issues that may come about. So observe, we didn't say we manage the stakeholders, we manage their expectation, but we engage them, right? So this is important. So some of the interpersonal skills include building trust. I use the analogy several times that trust is like a forest. It takes 40 years to grow, but it can be burned down in 40 minutes. So it takes a while to build that, and it's important in building trust with your stakeholders. It helps to improve their confidence level in you and their level of support. Resolving conflict. We looked at several conflict resolution techniques, of which the most effective had to do with being able to, well, we say confront, but problem solve. Confront the issue, problem solve / collaborate. Right? Others are not as effective. Active listening. Active listening means you look at the participant, in their face to face as that, and then you be able, so you face the person you're speaking to, you may clarify what they are saying by repeating it in a different way. You just show that how you are engaged. And then there's overcoming resistance to change. So you might employ some change management techniques such as followed by ADKAR, ADKAR model, where you have A means there's awareness for the need for change, D having a desire for change, K knowledge as to how to, and then ability and etc. Right? So you can look at that. Alright, so we did identify stakeholders, we did plan, and what was this third one? If you say manage stakeholder engagement, yep, that's it. So let's kind of now move into our final area. So control stakeholder is necessary because the strategy that you would use to engage stakeholder may not hold all the time. Especially for any project, the larger the project, you may have new stakeholders coming on board. Some stakeholders who were there no longer around, either because we're in a different phase of the project or we have new persons in the organization. So you may have a new executive, a new senior manager, a new head of department. You may have, it might be the head of a government agency and it's someone new, and that person may have different requirements, though they have the same level of authority. So what you want to ensure is that you're going to monitor the effectiveness of the strategies being employed. And if the effectiveness of the strategy being employed is not given the result, then you have to make your adjustment for various reasons. So the control here part means I look at my project management plan, albeit especially my stakeholder management plan. What issues do we have before us? What is the work performance data? That is, how are things going right now? How are we producing the deliverables? How is our timing? How is our spending money? All that comes under work performance data, and being able to make a judgment call on it. Quick quiz. In a monthly steering meeting, you ask one of the stakeholders on your project if she was reviewing the latest document updates you have made since the last meeting. She says, I am not working on that. I am not even sure what it is. How would you best describe her level of engagement? So in the question, the person responds, I am not working on that, and I not even sure what it is. Some person argue the fact that she says I'm not working on that means she aware what that is, but that could just mean as a point of reference. What is important? She is saying I am not even sure what that is. So we say that the person is unaware. Which stakeholder management process is in the initiating process group? So initiating process group, there are two processes. One is from chapter 4 regarding to develop the charter, and the other is in chapter 13 pertaining to identify stakeholders. So if you had that right, then you were on track. Last question. Which stakeholder management process is in the monitoring and controlling process group? This is just a knowledge-based question. So monitoring and control, what you look for is the word control. Whether it be control scope, control time, control quality, control stakeholder engagement, control risk. Those are under the monitoring and control process group. So if you said D, control stakeholder management, then you are right.